on today's World Insight. Russian President Putin up close and personal with U.S. President Trump in a Friday Anchorage one-on-one meeting. Up for talks, an end to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So, reality check, what's the likely outcome?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. The one-on-one meeting between U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin takes place on Friday, Alaska time, in the U.S. state's largest city, Anchorage. With the Russian-Ukraine conflict the top agenda, Trump on Wednesday warned Russia would face what he calls severe consequences if Putin falls short of agreeing to a ceasefire in their meeting. After an earlier meeting with Trump, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and other European leaders, like French President Emmanuel Macron, said Trump agreed that territories belonging to Ukraine cannot be negotiated and will only be negotiated by the Ukrainian president. Meanwhile, Trump has issued an executive order hitting India with an additional 25% secondary tariff over its purchases of Russian oil. For its part, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said also this week China supports all efforts toward a Ukraine peace settlement and is glad to see Russia and the U.S. in contact toward the conflict's political settlement. So now, time to loop in our panelists today. Joining us in Shanghai, Zhang Xin, Associate Professor from School of Politics and International Relations with East China Normal University. In Moscow, Andrei Kortunov, who is a former academic director of Russian International Affairs Council. In New York, U.S., Vladimir Goldstein, Professor of Slavic Studies with Brown University. Last but not least, in Washington, D.C., Anton Fedashian, Associate Professor of History Department from American University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. On Friday, in Anchorage, Alaska, the meeting taking place between Russian and the U.S. presidents. So, it is a very much, every step of the way, a lot of updates. First of all, how much expectation really is there in the U.S. about the result of this meeting? Professor Goldstein?
Yeah, I think it's more or less divided by the party lines. That is, Democrats who don't like anything which Trump does or proposes think that it's unrealistic, that it's doing too much favor to Putin, that the business should continue as usual, and it wouldn't lead anywhere. However, I believe the saner voices and those who think that Trump is not just a buffoon, but can be a serious politician, think that that's the way to go, because sooner or later, the war has to stop and diplomacy has to win. So they expect something productive coming out of it. And they basically went on the record, because Trump, despite his kind of sometimes extravagant rhetoric and extravagant actions, managed to accomplish certain amount of things, including the recent peace deal between Armenia and Azerbaijan and so on. So many people expect some breakthroughs.
Professor Fedashian, you agree with Professor Goldstein, it seems that it's by the party line, yeah? Expectation is divided by the party line.
It's in the United States, it is. And then the question becomes expectations on the geographical Ukrainian level or on the broader strategic international one.
Go to you, Mr. Kortunov. What is the expectation in Russia?
Well, I think that everybody here understands that you cannot prepare a full-fledged summit meeting in just 1 week. So this meeting will be ad hoc. And definitely, we cannot expect any breakthroughs. The best that they expect in Moscow is to see the U.S. and the Russian position getting closer to each other, maybe on the ceasefire, maybe on the future European security, but it's just the beginning, not the end of the story.
Mr. Zhang, of course, China is not a party directly involved, either in the conflict or in this bilateral meeting between the two presidents, U.S. and Russia. But China certainly is a close observer. What is your expectation? And, mainly your peers in China, what are they looking at?
It seems many of my colleagues tend to see this as, first of all, it's a bilateral meeting. So it's not going to be a break. One cannot expect some fundamental breakthrough on the Ukrainian issue. So, secondly, the meeting, including its location, including the possible topic, probably will hold more symbolic value than substantive results. So I think it's important for the two leaders to meet, have a direct conversation, and possibly, as one of our colleagues just mentioned, to know each other's positions better.
Mr. Fedashian, we have already seen pressure being put by the current White House toward the Russian side, suggesting if there is no good result, the sanctions are going to continue and there's going to be even more quote-unquote punishment. Do you see that strategy might work, that tactics might work for Russia?
No, that tactic is not going to work. In the past 3.5 years of similar threats that prove directly that economic sanctions do not work. What they do is that they internationalize a conflict and make it more complex and more difficult to settle. Moreover, I'm not sure what there's left to sanction for the Americans, except secondary sanctions, but then they're not sanctioning the Russians. They're sanctioning the Chinese and the Indians, and both of those sides have said that they're not going to abide by them.
So what do you think when President Trump suggests very serious consequences? Who do you think he is thinking about when it comes to his audience, if it's not the Russians?
It's not the Russians. It's Lindsey Graham, Richard Blumenthal. It is the hawkish party in the American Senate who want to take the tools of negotiations out of Trump's hand, impose secondary tariffs at 500%, which will then make that tool simply irrelevant because it won't be able to be used as a stick and carrot in negotiations with the Russians or with anyone else, for that matter.
Mr. Kortunov, what kinds of gift do you think the Russian president can present to the American president during the talk? Well, at the same time, what kind of ground do you think the Russian president would hold dearly?
Well, given the composition of the Russian team, which goes to Alaska, one can imagine that President Putin intends to discuss not only Ukraine, but also other important dimensions of the bilateral relationship. He brings his top associates on economic issues, so they might discuss finance, they might discuss joint economic projects, they might discuss cooperation in the Arctic region. And on top of that, there are rumors here in Moscow that one of the priorities might be a kind of resurrection of the badly damaged U.S.-Russian strategic arms control, to the extent the Trump administration might be interested in resuming this arms control. I think that the idea is to prove that though Ukraine is very important, but it is not the only game in town between the United States and the Russian Federation.
Besides Russia and the United States, there are a lot of other players that are directly or indirectly impacted as a result, or linked at least, to this meeting between the U.S. and Russian president. On the top of list, of course, Ukraine. While at the same time, Ukrainians' European counterparts, we have seen Mr. Goldstein earlier quite shuttling diplomacy, shall we say, by German, by French, and by some players within the EU on the latest Russian-U.S. president's meeting, particularly as to what might it mean for Ukraine and the security situation of Europe. Do you see these kind of efforts will pay off, or it's just not relevant in the eyes of the U.S. president or the U.S. diplomacy?
Unfortunately, it's both in the eyes of United States and in the eyes of reality. Europeans are always sort of behind the times, and they don't have enough money to craft their own policy. They don't have enough unity to craft their own policy. So the best they can do is actually agree with the United States and try to end the thing rather than trying to craft their own independent policy, which is based on nothing. They don't have enough material
I
to
see.
enough strength to form something of their own.
But of course, the European leaders suggested that during their earlier discussion with the U.S. president, the latter has agreed that only when the Ukrainian president is present, the territorial issue will be discussed. Now, of course, that is an indirect quote, not directly coming from the U.S. president. Professor Fedashian, your take on that?
I think that's actually fairly accurate, because I don't think that Donald Trump actually wants to deal with the morass of border issues in eastern Ukraine. I think he's more likely to shove this responsibility off on the Europeans, and then, of course, allow the Ukrainians to have a say in this matter. It's their country, it's their borders. And by the way, without their agreement, nothing will be finalized. But listen, Donald Trump is ultimately a businessman and a showman, by the way. So for Donald Trump, it is business that is ultimately the strategic goal here. And when it comes to countries with which to do business between Ukraine and Russia, only one will actually provide benefits. Profits for the United States, and that's Russia. First for its rare earth minerals, then for the Arctic, and a whole slew of other things. For Donald Trump, the businessman, Ukraine is constantly in the red. It is a source of American money being spent, not American money being made. The composition of the Russian delegation, something that Mr. Kortunov mentioned earlier, is very important here, because Anton Siluanov, the finance minister, and then Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Direct Foreign Investment Fund, are accompanying Putin, in addition to the minister, of course, of Foreign Affairs, his national security advisor, and the Minister of Defense. And that tells me that while Ukraine will be the PR focus of this meeting, that the conversation will be much, much broader, because the Trump administration wants to reset at least the business contacts with the Russians in order to ultimately make money. And if some Ukrainian interests have to be sacrificed, or European interests have to be sacrificed, then so be it. Trump doesn't care about those two entities, as we, by the way, just saw when Trump concluded the trade agreement with the EU.
Also, lately, we've been hearing from top officials coming from the Trump administration, the Treasury Secretary, for example, trying to threaten some of the business partners of Russia, such as India, with extra tariffs as a result of their buying oil coming from Russia. Earlier threats were also made toward China, and were asked in the earlier rounds of discussions on trade issue, China to buy more energy coming from the United States. Of course, China looked at it as a sovereignty issue. It seems so did India. So, but the question really is, Mr. Kortunov, if trading partners of Russia are being threatened by a third party for doing business with Russia, then what role and what kinds of consensus do you think that Russia needs to establish with their trading partners? And to what degree Russia would make its efforts so that those trade deals or business deals can continue?
Well, a lot will depend on the positions taken by Russia's trade partners. If you look, for example, at the initial reaction from New Delhi, the reaction turned out to be stronger than many of us anticipated. Definitely, India is not ready to yield to the U.S. pressure. Of course, each of the countries will follow its own national interests, and I think that they will try to find some kind of a compromise. But these are global markets. It is very difficult to insulate a large producer like Russia. And of course, such attempts might be also detrimental to the international economic system and to the long-term economic interests of the United States. So I'm sure that no matter what happens, even if the United States tries to apply more pressure on Russia's partners, there will be many exceptions, many waivers, and that will inflate the pressure that it might exercise on major countries from the global south.
How is China looking at the secondary tariff, the current White House threatening against India? And how is China looking at its earlier decision to suggest that where to buy energy is an issue of sovereignty, not under, quote unquote, the guidance of any other countries, including the United States?
It's a sovereign state's own decision to make its own choice of economic relationship. Having said that, I have to point out, I think the U.S. Sanction, not only potential sanction, but those sanctions that has been already levied against Russia, I wouldn't say it has no visible impact. It actually does have a huge impact, including some of the secondary sanctions that are already being practiced. It has significantly constrained the economic space for Russia, as well as its potential economic relation with its partners, in particular in the finance sector. Bilateral payments between Russia and its main trading partners have under significant constraints. So I think the impact is there. It's not large enough to immediately cause a ceasefire, cause the Russia state to change its course in the military operation in Ukraine, but its impact is huge. And also it takes quite some efforts so far. It has taken quite some efforts so far for both Russia and its trading partners, economic partners, to try to jointly find a way to go around these sanctions. So I think this is a serious threat, and its impact has been, I think, seriously discussed, and the possible way to go around it, countermeasures, are being seriously discussed within and outside the community.
The relationship between the two presidents of Russia and United States has always been quite interesting and always catching the spotlight of the international press, starting from term one of the U.S. President Donald Trump, even until today. Now, Professor Fedashian, what is your observation of both the approach, the attitude, and also the tactics, and possibly the strategic goals, do you think? Compare Trump first term, Trump second term, toward its Russian counterpart, and on the issue of relations between U.S. and Russia.
Trump was much more disposed towards Vladimir Putin during the first term because he didn't have to deal with the acute problem of the Ukraine war. Things have changed slightly this time around because there's this elephant in the room that the two men have to sort of tap dance around. But I think that the strategic goal for Trump hasn't changed significantly between his first term and his current term, because he was always favorably inclined towards Russia and all countries in the world. He is interested in trade. He understands profound geopolitical disagreements. He can be very hawkish on places like China, for example. But for Russia, he always kept sort of a special place in terms of not seeing it as a sufficiently significant economic threat to the United States to worry about it, to label it, to identify it, to define it as an existential enemy, but he always saw it as a potential ally against bigger threats as he sees them. And that, of course, is China, and he's on record saying so over and over again. So for him, the strategy, I think here, the overall strategy is really to fix the relationship with Russia. Unfortunately, he's working against a very entrenched party of war here in Washington, D.C., which wants to wage war, not literally a hot war, but a trade war, a geopolitical war against everyone at the same time. And he very often strays into that territory, but sort of steps back when his common sense kicks in. So we'll be watching the outcome of the meeting in Alaska for days and weeks to come as this recalibration of the whole global order continues.
Mr. Kortunov, people get very excited when they talk about the triangle relationship among China, the United States, and Russia as well, because there were some earlier stories of the Cold War, isn't it? And the different countries among these three have their strategic choices and eventually change the world, so to speak. But what do you think about the realities now?
There are attempts in the United States to compare the situation today with the situation 50 years ago. And to argue that today the United States should play Henry Kissinger in reverse, that the United States should align with Russia in order to isolate China and to focus on this strategic adversary. But of course, it is not possible because the situation today is very, very different from what it was back in early 1970s. And Russia and China are too close to each other. This partnership is too valuable for Moscow to trade it for better relations with the United States. The United States simply cannot offer anything that can be compared to the current strategic partnership that Moscow has with Beijing. Besides, one should also keep in mind that personally, President Putin and Chairman Xi invested a lot into building their relations. And I think that they are not ready to sacrifice this investment. So I think that we cannot really talk about a triangle any longer. Hopefully, relations between Russia and the United States will get better. Maybe it is possible to avoid a major crisis between China and the United States. But the relations between Moscow and Beijing have their own foundation, and a very solid foundation. Two big neighboring nations with complementary economies, with many similar views on the world. So I don't think that it will fade away anytime soon.
In the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit to be held at the end of August this year, just a few weeks from now, by the way, all of the heads of state coming from those countries that are members of Shanghai Cooperation Organization are going to participate. So that, of course, includes the Russian president, as well as China, India as well. So what kind of message do you think these countries, when they are coming together, would send to the rest of the world regarding this interesting triangle we just mentioned, and also regarding what they consider as the significance strategically for themselves?
In this upcoming Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit, as you described, major leaders of all the member states are going to meet in China for this summit. It definitely demonstrates the common agenda and joint interest of all SCO member states to have a not a counter anti-West, but a non-West regional organization that has been expanding in its both membership, but also its coverage of issue area from regional, much limited regional security to a more and more economic collaboration, and for a political collaboration on a much larger space, right? So this non-West region-based organization offer important, at least an important alternative example of joint development collaboration outside of the existing power structure of the international system.
How much do you think this meeting in Anchorage will help people to understand to what degree Russia and the United States are willing to invest in their relationship, while at the same time, how much they really value this relationship given their national interests?
these two countries definitely should take each other seriously, and Russia always took United States seriously, but which cannot be said about United States. And I think this meeting will be one way to convey both to American people and American leadership and to Trump that this is a new reality, that somehow it cannot be solved, in one way by decree. And I think of all people, as a businessman, or rather as a deal maker, Trump sort of understands it. And the more quicker it sinks in for the other leaders of the United States, that you cannot run unilaterally, that China is now is an elephant in the room, should be taken seriously. The same thing with India, and things cannot be solved by tariffs and expect that these countries will follow. So it's their interest to present unified, front, and Putin, I'm sure, will convey to Trump that we are together. You cannot really just break us apart and continue rule as the West ruled so-called Third World in the 18th and 19th century.
Let's just assume some outcome out of this meeting between the U.S. and the Russian president. But we have seen repeatedly practices of promise being made and promise broken, rhetorics being suggested, eventually not follow up. So when it comes to president's meeting like this, how seriously should we take it? Or it's just the news story of a day? Mr. Kortunov.
Well, I think that a summit meeting usually opens a range of opportunities. These opportunities can be made use of, they can be wasted, they can be undermined or promoted, but it opens certain doors, especially if a summit meeting is successful. So let us hope that that will be the case this time.
All right. Professor Goldstein?
Yeah, I think even if this is not a final meeting to solve all the meetings, it's definitely a step in the right direction. Because, even if nothing is agreed in this time, with the war continuing, basically Russia will continue to make advances, and sooner or later, all major powers have to sit down and solve it diplomatically. And I hope that both European leaders and Ukrainian leaders understand that it's in their interest to solve it sooner rather than later.
Mr. Fedashian?
Diplomacy is always better than its absence, and I find it very encouraging to see that the Americans are finally beginning to engage the Russians directly, and the rest we will just have to wait and see what happens. But political will is the beginning of breakthroughs.
Mr. Zhang?
Wish this will not be a Yalta 2.0. It at least will open some room for the next meeting where all the stakeholders can have a say.
Thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and also for your insights. Appreciate it. And that's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on X and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for being with us, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.